putting things in the refrigerator and allowing them to have a slow thaw is the best way to preserve the water holding capacity of that meat. You definitely can submerge that entire, fill your sink with cold water and thaw it in cold water for the day or for a couple of hours, and that will break, that will thaw it as well. But if you can give yourself a couple of days of notice, probably like 3 days for like a 5-pound bag, that meat will thaw out. And if it's partially frozen, especially if you're working grind, having partially frozen meat or partially frozen fat is actually a good thing, because you don't want that meat to get heated up or too warm while you're working through your grind, because that can add in some off flavors. That can also then like just coat your grinder in a layer of fat. It's not going to mix in, but it's mostly the flavor of that meat that you might be impacting. So partially frozen trim and partially frozen fat is not a bad thing when you're grinding, because you want to keep that temperature low.
Welcome to the Soul Summit podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Preedy. I'm here to help bridge the gap for women and families in the outdoors, build a community of adventure junkies, and roll out your weekly dose of positive vibes. With almost 2 decades in the health and fitness world and an untamable passion for hunting in the outdoors, my mission is to help you live your bucket list life and move boldly in the direction of your dreams. Meet us here weekly as I connect with like-minded outdoor men and women to discuss health and mindset, accountability, life and entrepreneurship, as well as all things hunting and epic untold stories. All right, we are jumping into another episode of the Soul Summit podcast, and we are back in here with Sierra Jepsen. Now, Sierra was on our last season, season 8, episode 170, talking about lots of really hands-on, practical, tactical things that people can take into the field when it comes to game processing, meat care, knife care, that kind of stuff. But we're going to jump into something totally different today. And first, I want you to talk to us about the Meat Olympics. Okay, just take us right into this, Sierra.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Again, thank you for having me back. We're here to talk about more meat science as it relates to our hunters, because like it or not, if you all are successful in the field, you will be a butcher at least one day a year. So I'm really grateful for you all making space in a hunting environment for the butcher in us all. But yes, what I've been up to most recently, I was traveling to Paris, France to compete in the Butcher Olympics. So the World Butcher Challenge is the official title. I forget how many countries were present. I think it was like 15 or something, but countries from all over the world came to compete. And I competed as an individual in the Young Butcher competition. So 30 years or younger. There were folks from Australia, New Zealand, Czech Republic, Germany, Belgium, United States, Ireland, Indonesia, wow, all over the world. So it was really excellent to be able to cut up some beef, pork, lamb, poultry. And it wasn't just cutting the proteins. The protein cutting is the easiest piece, but you needed to also make a retail display. And so gosh, I think I was done cutting all of my proteins within like an hour. And then it was like chopping vegetables and, you coming up with this really elaborate retail display to really showcase the meats and what part of the world you come from and what sells really well and how we can be creative and innovative with these cuts of meat. And so I kind of laugh where I didn't know about this event until Instagram kind of targeted me and was like, hey, tryouts. And so I've been practicing for the Butcher Olympics it was like almost 2 years, a year and a half that I'd been practicing. And so it was nice to finally get to Paris and kind of, put the knife on the block and really get to showcase some skills. But I laugh because I'm a meat scientist first and I am a butcher second. I don't own brick and mortar. I don't cut meat every single day the way that a lot of the other butchers in other countries do. And even when I am butchering, I'm educating other people. And so by no means am I the best butcher in the world. So it was a really cool experience for me to get to learn and to try some new things and to kind of see how fast I can go and see how creative I can be. Because a lot of times when I'm teaching other butchers, the fact is, let's slow down and let's learn the really foundational pieces of butchery, and let's figure out what these muscles can become and what their uses are, and thinking about the fundamentals of meat science that makes butchery really unique. And so even as butchers and as an educator, we're always learning new things and trying to push ourselves further. So it was a fun little mental exercise as well as a physical competition.
That's super cool. And I can only imagine that when you get yourself into an environment with that much like diversity, right? Like we're collectively like learning from other people then, or kind of picking up on some of these other maybe more traditional things that would happen in somebody else's home country. Were there any big takeaways or learning pieces that you brought back to the States with you?
Yes. So anybody can go on YouTube and watch World Butcher Challenge 2025. You can watch the team competition that's got 6 people, and then there's the individual competition as well. What I learned, especially during practice, it was kind of funny to me. So yeah, we practiced every month, and we purchased our own proteins in, so beef, pork, lamb, and poultry. And then at the end of practice, whatever shop we were in, if they could sell stuff in retail, then they would buy it back from you. And then they would actually be able to sell that in the case. And then anything that they couldn't sell would then be on me to pay for. And in practice, things that I was constantly hearing from my coaches, they were trying to make me better, is this, your chicken's not sexy enough. And, this isn't, we need more creativity. We need more wow factor, more oomph. But what did they buy? They bought that non-sexy chicken every single time, because that's what our American consumers know, and it's what they recognize, and they know how to cook it. And when I was looking then at the competition, at the countries that won, that was France, Australia, Germany, they have such an elevated wow factor to their meat products. And you think about the butchers that are in those countries, it's very boutique. But we think about the United States, and we think about how we cook. We aren't purchasing meats every single day to then cook them that evening. We are storing meats in freezers, in refrigeration. We are stocking up for the long haul. And a lot of like really artistic meats, consumers get a little nervous about that, because it's like, oh, I'm going to pay a lot of money for this protein. I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to wreck it. And that's kind of the same thing when we think about our hunter community as well, is that I've just put in a year of work thinking about this hunt. And I have, been working on the rifle I'm going to take and the load development and where I'm going to go hunt. And I'm thinking about, how do I get this meat out safely and cool and keep it cold, and then I have to figure out how to butcher it. And so by the time that you're getting that meat product to your freezer, the innovation is like, okay, steaks and roasts, just get it in there, make sure it's going to feed everybody. And so even like as I have started training hunters, of course I want to teach them all the fun, unique, innovative cuts that we can get off wild game. And why shouldn't you get the flat irons and the ribeye steaks and all of that? But what our hunters really just want to know is my meat going to be safe and healthy and wholesome enough to feed my family? And how long can I keep that in my freezer until I need another animal? And so as much as butcher competitions like these are insane to see, all the cool things that we can do with meat, sometimes the only thing our consumer cares about is, will this feed my family, and how far can I push it to feed my family?
As somebody that just came from both New Zealand and Australia, getting to travel there and walk through the markets and like check out their protein, it's interesting hearing you say that, because I definitely got different vibes walking through the meat department in those countries as opposed to here in the States. And fortunately, we don't buy animal protein from the store outside of bacon. But it was very different. It's not only called something different, it's packaged differently. And, watching 2 people buy and consume over there, it is that much more like, oh, I'm going to go to the market today to buy the protein I'm going to have tonight, as opposed to like you just described, like here, we're going to our freezer, even if we ever do like find something, great cut on sale at a market, I buy 3 of them, I put it in the freezer. It's like, we're squirreling this stuff away for, for the year to come. So I do think that that's a very interesting perspective that we have on kind of like that long shelf life in the freezer.
It was really cool in France. We walked into a couple butcher shops, and they just had whole lambs, whole pigs, and
Wow.
it would cut you the steak that you wanted right there. And I was thinking about shelf life even in our, United States retail cases. How much easier it would be for our butchers if they just had whole carcasses hanging, and then as somebody wanted something, you just cut it off, and you didn't have to worry about, as color is changing and a consumer might not want it, and then what do you do with that discolored meat? And so,
Yeah.
it's just a different mindset around meat waste and
Yeah.
like the immediate, we're going to cook it tonight, versus in the United States, we feel more comfortable having our meats frozen, and we live farther away from supermarkets. We have to think how vast, our country is, and a lot of people live in food deserts, and so you need to have access to your own proteins in more of a robust stockpiled way than having that immediate reliance on a grocery store or a local butcher for every single meal that you want to consume protein.
So, talking about shelf life, so to speak, and having these cuts in the freezer, we work to have a year's worth of protein, fish and red meat and, some poultry in our freezer that we can just go out, throughout the year until it's hunting season again and we can replenish. Let's talk about shelf life, though. What is this optimal time when packaged correctly? And maybe walk us through what a good packaging for the freezer looks like.
Sure. So the scientific answer, the official answer, is 1 year of shelf life for meats that are protected appropriately from refrigerated or freezer conditions. I tend to keep my meats up to 2 years, and so the official answer is try to finish them within a year. However, as long as you are protecting your meat from oxygen, that is the main deterrent that's going to really just degrade your meat quality. So if your packaging is correctly sealed off from oxygen, that meat product is going to last much, much longer. Oxygen is then what is causing any of that freezer burn to occur. That could, all that crystallization, any of that crystallization that's forming in the meat product, it's forming little ice crystals. Ice, we know, contracts, it expands, and it goes through its different phases. And with each time it contracts and expands, it's breaking down muscle fiber in a negative way. And really, it's impacting the meat tenderness and the meat's ability to hold water. And so any of that freezer burnt product, yes, it tastes a little wonky, but you will experience a less tender, or a less juicy, water-filled product, because once it thaws, it can't hold water anymore. And so it won't be as juicy. And so if, depending on what people feel comfortable with, you can package your meat either in butcher paper or in vacuum sealing. I find my meat is, okay, so in commercial settings, vacuum sealing is the best way to hold meat for a long period of time, because it's a sealed protectant barrier against outside oxygen. And so those products tend to last longer in freezer conditions. However, a lot of us hunters are using the cheap little, Elium or the Cabela's vacuum sealers, and sometimes the seal isn't really great on them. And so I'm actually experiencing that my butcher paper wrapped products, if you can add a couple layers of wrap, if some people like to wrap it in saran wrap first and then butcher paper, however many barriers you can add to protect against that oxygen, the longer it's going to be stable. But I was pulling packs of meat out of the freezer that were from 2020, and it's 2025, and I'm like, okay, we need to use this now.
Yeah.
But it was still good. It was still fine. And that was butcher paper. And then I experienced vacuum sealing. It's great when it is sealed. But if you're not constantly turning over your freezer and double checking, okay, was there a bag where the seal wasn't correct and there is oxygen that's exposed to that product, those are the products that need turned over faster. So tight seals protecting against that oxygen, it's the worst thing for meat under frozen conditions. That's really going to depend, can you get past that 1 year of shelf life?
So we do kind of a combination. I grew up just butcher paper all the way. We would just double wrap in butcher paper.
Mhm.
And then I started seeing friends saran wrap and then butcher paper. For me, I don't know. I just never got behind the whole saran wrap first. I think saran wrap is a pain in the butt anyways to deal with. So I was just like, yeah, we'll just ditch that one. And we primarily just use a vacuum sealer to get everything sealed up. But like you, I've been running through packages from 2020 and 2021. Something that I recently did too that we loved having was I was going through and I found like some duck and goose and some antelope and some old, bear grind and just a whole bunch of like what I would call like a smorgasbord of like just meat when we were moving, so we were cleaning out the freezers and I just threw it all into a bin and we ended up grinding it all together. It was delicious. Like we didn't find a BB or two in there, we ate with caution, but it was really good just to take all of those different things that could have eventually been looked at like, oh, it's been too long, it's too old, it's too this or that. Like, and maybe it wouldn't have tasted that great on its own.
Mhm.
It was really, really delicious in that kind of smorgasbord of a jerky. So it was really good to do that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's always a way to repurpose meat. I am such a component where I think a superpower of mine is turning leftovers into something that was even better than what it initially was
Right.
for. And
Yes.
there's so much you can do with, like even, okay, folks get a little concerned with when they get an animal home. It's like, how do I butcher this quickly? It's like just big pieces of meat is fine. And then later you can cut that into stew meat later, or you can repurpose it and regrind it later. And if you have big pieces of meats, or you can hand cut your own steaks or repurpose it in a different way that you feel more comfortable later. People tend to get really overwhelmed with that initial butchery process. And so
Yes.
I think having like large gallon sized vac bags that can be vacuum sealed are great for those big pieces of meat of like off of the round and the hind quarter or big shoulder roasts. The larger the piece of meat, I think the better that a vacuum sealed bag is going to be, versus being able to get a really tight wrap on butcher paper is much easier for smaller packs of steaks or, whole muscle roasts. And then you'll be able to get a tighter wrap on those. So having some vac seal bags on hand to just, big pieces of meat in vacuum sealing, we can thaw this and work it up later. That's perfectly acceptable. But butcher paper, it's so cheap. It's so cheap. You can go to Costco, you can buy a roll for like $50. And I bought a roll back in 2019 and I think I'm only halfway through it. And it has packaged moose, countless elk, countless antelope, countless mule deer, and we're only halfway through it. So butcher paper is the economic way to go.
Yes, absolutely is. And you don't need electricity. So if you're, a little bit more off grid when you're processing, that's nice because you can just do it, pretty easily.
Having an extra person there, one person, two people are cutting and somebody else is wrapping. It's a little harder to, it's easy just to shuffle things in bags and then vacuum seal, but butcher paper, having a couple extra hands is nice.
Yeah.
Who's your
definitely.
tape person? Yeah.
Who's going to label? Who's got the best handwriting? Definitely. Going back to talking about just freezing essentially those larger pieces of meat, something that we tend to do too, because at the end, right, when you're pulling out and you've got a nice big chunk of red protein, you can either choose to throw it in a crock pot for the day, you can hand cut your steaks, you could turn it into something totally different. So I find it gives us a little bit more versatility.
Mm-hmm.
The one con is that it takes longer to defrost. Like that's the one thing, as opposed to having the steaks that are all, ready to go. It just takes a little bit longer, a little bit more kind of thought ahead of time, maybe.
Let's talk about defrosting.
Okay, let's do.
And as it relates to packaging. So I will say a real positive plug for vacuum sealing is that it is so easy to thaw meats in water. Thawing meat in water is my preferred method of thawing because, okay, if I'm going to have a steak for dinner and I was planning on cooking dinner in like 20 minutes, great. You can pull a pack of steaks out of the freezer in a vacuum sealed bag, put it in a bowl of cool water, and those steaks are thawed in like 10 minutes. Same thing with a roast. I mean, if it's in vacuum seal, you can put it in a bowl of water and put that in your fridge and it'll be thawed by the end of the day. So it really is an excellent thawing method. Additionally, I would say thinking about thawing meats from frozen, or cooking meats from frozen, we got to think like these animals were not processed in the safest, most, pristine of conditions. And so from a microbial standpoint, we worked up our meat, we put it in the freezer. Cooking from frozen is actually a very, very safe way to prevent any of that microbe activity from rearing its ugly head. And so, putting a wild game roast or steaks or stew meat directly into the crock pot from frozen, putting that on high and leaving it there for 12 hours, it's going to create the same effects. And we never give those microbes the chance to wake back up. And so that's definitely something that I take into practice, especially if it's antelope or something like I know we were out in the heat of the summer and these, whatever it might be. If you had a critter that might have had some extra, gut shot or something that we hope we got everything off, but there's a chance it was exposed to more heat or more whatever than we wanted to, cook it from frozen and, it'll be just fine.
Interesting. I've always thought that, and I'd love for your opinion on this, of course, but I've always thought that if you cook something from frozen, it's going to be a boot. Does that affect the tenderness of the cut in the end or not at all?
I'm sure there are meat scientists that have studied a little bit deeper, but I'm pretty sure there are several studies that say no. There is really no tenderness impact if cooked from frozen to or from frozen or from thawed. I'm sure there's plenty of meat science research that has studied different effects, but a lot of what I see is a consumer can't really tell the difference. So yes, maybe there is slight tenderness, but it's not something palatable that we're really going to tell the difference in. A lot of that tenderization, yes, there is tenderization that happens during like the hanging period. And there is tenderization that happens if our products are vacuum sealed. There is some wet aging that we can do. They are aging in the freezer. So there is some tenderization that's happening. But once it comes down to the cooking of that meat product, the degree of doneness will impact how tender it appears. How much water is still held within that meat will impact the palatability. However, whether you're cooking from thawed or frozen, it's going to have insignificant impact in how you perceive that meat to be tender.
Let's talk about the person that takes the meat out, puts it on the counter for 8 hours, gets home from work, and then wants to cook it up. What is your advice to that person?
Stop doing that. There are many meat science approved ways to thaw meat, and that is the only one that is going to have significant impacts on your health, because we are exposing those meat products to the danger zone, which is anything above 40 degrees or 40 degrees and higher. So meat freezes at 28 degrees, and those microbes, they start to wake up, become more active, and pathogens can start wreaking havoc about 40 degrees. And so keeping meat in refrigerated temperatures until you're ready to use it is the best practice. So whether you want to thaw meat, straight from the freezer into the refrigerator and let it sit there for a day or so to thaw out, that's the longest way, but it is the best way to, that slow thaw will hold in more water to that product. And so again, that juiciness, that's the best way to thaw meat products. I thaw in water because it's pretty darn quick. You can thaw in the microwave. However, that will have a little bit more of that oxidized flavoring, that warmed over flavor. So it is safe, but you will impact the flavor, and there's going to be more water that's evaporated. Thawing on the counter is not a safe or approved way. So if you need to thaw it quickly, put it in cool water. It'll thaw quick.
Perfect. So let's talk about that thawing process. Say we've got a beautiful roast and it's been in the fridge a couple days and we intended to cook it for dinner last night and something came up and now it's been sitting there. How long is that thawed red protein okay to sit in the fridge?
I consider them similar to leftovers, where it's like if there's something in your fridge for over a week, that's probably not great. And especially thinking about the moisture loss that's there. That's more of the palatability piece. And then there's also the perspective of, is it still safe? So the longer that meat is in a refrigerated space, that moisture, that water is just going to be seeping out. So you're going to have a lot more purge to that product. You want to use it within like 3 or 4 days realistically, but if it's been in there up to a week, that's when you need to make a decision. Either cook it, and then you can still, then now it's cooked, you can still leave it in there for another week and repurpose it, or you need to refreeze it. So the answer, I guess the best answer here would be just go ahead and cook it and just get it done with. Because if you put that now thawed, product back into the freezer, you've just lost a lot of moisture out of that product. That meat doesn't reabsorb the water. It's not like a sponge. It doesn't go back into the meat product. You've already lost that meat, that water. And so if you freeze it again to protect yourself against any microbes that might start growing or whatever, when you go to rethaw that piece of meat, we've already lost a lot of water. Now we're going to lose even more. And so it's going to be a much, much drier meat product. And so thawing under vacuum sealed conditions, that meat is still under vacuum seal. And so it's, not exposed to any microbial growth or anything, hopefully. However, if you thawed with butcher paper, there is oxygen, there is microbial growth that can be exposed. And so not only is it a loss of water, a loss of juiciness, we're also exposing to more of those microbes. So use that meat within 3 or 4 days and then either cook it or refreeze it. Cooking it would be the best option.
If it's in the fridge, thawed for a week, and then you just get it done and you cook it up, it can last another week. Okay. That just blew my mind because I always thought it was from the time that it was essentially defrosted, that kind of time started ticking. You're saying that it's actually after it cooks. Is that correct?
That is my perspective. Again, I'm sure there is some meat science research, or maybe perhaps this is crossing into food science. But thinking about we are like transforming that product into a entire different form, and so yes, use it as fast as you can. But I typically think it's like once I've transformed it, it can now be in a, I've cooked off any other microbes that were there from being in the raw form. And so now anything new that's growing, that can be, reheated, remicrowaved, and any of those new pathogens could be eliminated in a different way. So use your meat products as quickly as you can. But there have been instances when our big freezer, the door pops open, or there's, the power goes out, whatever it might be. And so we've had some products that were in the door that were partially thawed. And it's like, okay, that's a meat science concern. Rather than throwing out all of those meat products, I bring them in, I cook them immediately. And then it was like all of our turkey from that year. So it was like, all right, no problem. So I cooked all of that meat immediately, and then we ate it that week. And so I always feel better where it's like, okay, if there is a tragedy with the freezer, something goes down, as long as it's still cool to the touch, I feel confident. It might not be frozen, but it's under 40 degrees. It's like, okay, it's still safe to eat. I'm going to cook it to make sure that any of that pathogenic material is killed from that process. And then I did eat it then, or served it to my family then that week to make sure, okay, then we are making sure that we are using it first.
So if you were to take that, like you just said, you cooked all of that up that week, what are your thoughts on then taking some of it? And this is something that we'll routinely do here. Like we'll make extras, we'll take a whole flat of it or whatever, and then we'll pop it in the freezer that we just reheat on a day that we're super busy. So we'll lose a bit of the juiciness to the protein. But other than that, it's a perfectly good way to kind of get yourself an advantage on a quick, easy meal.
Oh yeah. And I know a lot of folks will make like breakfast sausage or Italian sausage and things. And so whether you do that in the raw form, and typically it's like, I don't have enough time to like butcher this whole animal and then grind all the meat. And after I'm grinding, then I'm adding my spices. But I love when people do. So you can, if you're making sausage, you can either add your spices and your seasonings in the raw form, package it like that. Or the way I typically have found that I have time to do is I will cook up, grind, and add in all my seasonings, and then, give it some time to cool down in the fridge. And then I vacuum seal it once it's in its cook stage. And so then I've got these pre-packaged, little packs of Italian sausage that I can throw into hamburger helper or into soup or into spaghetti sauce, and it's already cooked. It just needs reheated, which that's another area where vacuum sealing comes in excellent, because you can ensure I've got a really good seal on it. Yes, it's not as moist as it would be if you cooked it, from fresh, but it's a really fast, easy meal. So yeah, if you're ever in doubt about a meat product, just cook it and then refreeze it. It's going to, kind of maintain the integrity of that meat a little bit better than, freezing and thawing over and over again.
Two questions I have kind of pertaining to that. So one, occasionally you'll get a cut of meat or a piece of lunch meat or a steak or something, and it has a little bit of like an iridescent look to it. I want to talk about what that kind of iridescent kind of shine to it is. My second question would be how to tell, like, okay, say you're on the fence and you're pushing the timeline for, when a meat should be cooked. What are going to be the signs that a meat is not healthy to eat?
Great. So we'll start with the iridescence. So for anybody, if you've ever seen, it's kind of like a rainbowy looking, cut of meat. And we typically see them in wild game, sometimes with beef or pork where there's not a lot of marbling, and you can just see this like a rainbow sheen. And what that is, each muscle bundle is surrounded by connective tissue. And that collagen connective tissue, if you cut the muscle fiber in just the right way, it can then reflect light. And so it's just the way that muscle fiber was cut that then reflects. And so typically we see that more iridescent sheen for poultry, low marbled beef, wild game, anything that doesn't have a lot of fat, that then, that fat is absorbing light. And so if there isn't fat to absorb light, you can catch that light absorption off of the muscle fiber connective tissue. So yeah, just something super interesting. But if your meat looks green or purple from that sheen, right, it's just the muscle fibers. It's not
perfect.
Yeah. It's nothing crazy. Great question. And then things to look for that your meat might be bad. A sniff test is always a true blue, way to go. Certainly with luncheon meats, or really, pot roast that you've had in a container for a while, anything that is developing a slime, that does need to go. And so that's definitely why a lot of people, thinking about pregnant ladies and not eating deli meats, that slime producing, toxins and pathogens, that's what we're concerned about when it comes to folks with weakened immune systems, is, we aren't cooking lunch meats before we consume them. And so if we have a leftover that maybe it's developing a little bit of its own funk, we're microwaving it, we're cooking it off. But if we're going to make our own lunch meats, or we realize that there's any of that slime in a packaging, we might notice with like some cheeses and things, that slime is definitely a sure tell sign that things are getting bad. You can notice that on fruits, on vegetables too. There are definitely that slime producing pathogen that we want to watch out for. And so anytime I see slime production, that's like, okay, it's really past the point of being able to like microwave or cook it and save it. So I would just definitely, sniff tests are really good. Slime production is definitely a bad thing. And then also just knowing how long things have been in your fridge, and making sure it's like, if it's been in there a week, you need to use it.
I do notice that, we tend to get really tired through the butchery process, especially if you're working up something big, like an elk or a couple elk or a moose. And I find that you're really excited kind of as you're getting into it, and you're like really savoring all these beautiful cuts. And then towards the end, you've got this big gallon Ziploc full of just like a whole bunch of meat that you're putting in there. I've got probably 5 of them in my freezer right now. Those are intended in this household to become jerky or maybe grind or something in the future. Talk about the process that you would do if you had those big gallon kind of ready to go, but not quite sure with, what we're going to do with them yet. What is the process then for defrosting them and then turning them into that jerky or grind or whatever the case is? What's the best way to do that and then get it back into the freezer?
Sure thing. We do a similar process too, where most of the time we aren't grinding our meat the same time that we're processing everything else, because you're right, you do just get tired. And so typically I'm keeping like a bowl next to my butcher station where anything that is grind goes in that bowl. We've been good on jerky for several years, but then if you have another jerky bucket, go ahead and put it in there, and then just vac seal like big, like 5-gallon or like 5-pound bags of trim, and then just freeze them all in that whole form. And that's great to then work from later. Putting things in the refrigerator and allowing them to have a slow thaw is the best way to preserve the water holding capacity of that meat. You definitely can submerge that entire, fill your sink with cold water and thaw it in cold water for the day or for a couple of hours, and that will break, that will thaw it as well. But if you can give yourself a couple of days of notice, probably like 3 days for like a 5-pound bag, that meat will thaw out. And if it's partially frozen, especially if you're working grind, having partially frozen meat or partially frozen fat is actually a good thing, because you don't want that meat to get heated up or too warm while you're working through your grind, because that can add in some off flavors. That can also then like just coat your grinder in a layer of fat. It's not going to mix in, but it's mostly the flavor of that meat that you might be impacting. So partially frozen trim and partially frozen fat is not a bad thing when you're grinding, because you want to keep that temperature low.
And that was actually going to be my next question was, is there a right or wrong way? Does it matter if it's a little bit frozen? Because it definitely does seem to go through the grind just a little bit easier that way.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to follow up. We've got a few other things we want to talk about that are super exciting. But before we do, I want to ask one more question. And this is something that I heard a lot this year, was a lot of, unfortunately it happens, but a lot of gut shots. Talk to me about how you would process an animal that had been gut shot to make sure that you're safe from any of those contaminants.
Sure thing. So kind of what, we touched on pathogenic material a little bit on the last podcast, but just to, remind folks, those specified risk materials that can carry E. coli, that will make you very, very sick, that is fecal, that is milk, and that is ingesta. And so a gut shot animal, that is where the ingesta is going to come into play. And it's pretty much just riddled throughout the interior of that carcass. And so the best advice I can have is do not open that animal up. You want to remove the hide and then just leave that body cavity alone. If you can have in your pack, it's always a great idea to have some nitrile gloves, have a spare, set of thin cotton gloves, or I think my fiance jokes with me. It's like I have a pair of gloves that like they kind of look like batting gloves. So just something like that's tight and form fitted to your hand, something that, number one, and if you're working up a bear or you're working up a critter with gut shot, something where it's just not the cleanest of animals, having a set of gloves in your pack is great. And so then you can handle that hide or any area where that ingesta is with those gloves. And then once you get that dirty section flipped away, removed from the clean carcass, take those gloves off. And then you can work with clean hands or put a clean set of gloves on. Just get that contaminant away from the animal.
Beautiful.
And work up as much as you can. You might have to avoid whole areas of that animal where normally you might be a family that really loves saving rib meat. You probably won't want to in this situation, because that rib meat is directly exposed to the ingesta. So yeah, leave the carcass intact, remove as much as you can in terms of meat once that carcass is not opened up. And likely, as much as it pains me to say it, you may not be able to save the tenderloins. If your shot was far enough back in the carcass, then there's a chance that those tenderloins may be impacted by that gut shot. If it was close up towards the lungs, close at the front of the fork, of the forequarter of that animal, you can probably still pop a hole right behind the ribs, go in there and retrieve your tenderloin. But if you notice a lot of ingesta around them, it's probably not worth your family's health.
I will note here that every state has a different regulation, or many states have different regulations on waste. So be sure if you're leaving anything behind, that it is not in violation of your state's game regs. Definitely check on that.
Yeah.
And I suppose the thing to do there, if you were in a state like Alaska, where you have to take all of the rib meat and all of the, all of those pieces, put it in a different bag, make sure nothing gets contaminated, and then sealed off so there's no seepage through. Would you say that's probably pretty adequate?
Absolutely. Yeah. Having enough game bags is definitely something that's important. So then you can, label everything. Yeah. Don't just count on yourself being able to put everything in 2 or 3. You might need 1 or 2 extra in order to, one, if everything goes great, being able to separate out enough meats into smaller, less packed in game bags allows that meat to, breathe a little bit easier, allows you to keep meat separated as forequarter, hindquarter, back straps. And so then it makes it easier to sort. And then in a worst case scenario, yes, you can put some of those questionable products that might need, maybe you want to save them and you can save them, but you just have to do a lot more trimming later. Just keeping them quarantined would allow. So having more game bags than fewer is always a great thing.
Yeah, great advice on that. And I know I said one question like several questions ago, but I have one more and I can't remember. I'm trying to think if we talked about this in episode 170 and I can't remember. So I'm going to bring it up again now. I typically will take a black contractor's bag or 2 in my pack. And then once we get something down, we get it in a game bag. We don't want to just put it bloody, especially in places like Alaska where we're in brown bear country. We'll put it in that contractor's bag unsealed so it can still breathe, but it's not seeping a bunch of blood all over us. Am I in trouble over that? Is that okay as long as it's still breathing?
I would say you are in trouble.
Okay.
Because game bags are meant to allow airflow to pass, through that meat. And so you're right. Like if bear country is a concern, you do want to protect the meat. But hanging it up in a limb as high off the ground as you can get. That is a good way to protect it from, predators or other things that want to get your meat, but also it's allowing air to pass through and around that meat. So contractor bags are not known for their breathability. And it's probably pretty unlikely that there is, even if it is coming in through the top, it's not circulating around that meat. And it's not all cooling at the same rate. So whatever is down on the bottom or packed against the sides, it's not breathing. And so, yeah, having equal airflow all around that meat is the best way to evenly cool everything and to keep that microbial growth down.
Even in transport? So like once it's at camp, it just in the game bag, but once we're taking it from in the field to the camp or close to camp to put up, still can't use the contractor bag there?
I guess that would probably, it depends. I would say like if you're putting it in a cooler where you've been cooling the cooler with ice and you don't want to you don't want to put your game bags directly in this melted ice. That would be a situation where you would not want to set a game bag directly in water. And so a contractor bag would be a great option there. But even if we are just putting our game bags on our packs, we're typically not putting them in anything else, especially a contractor bag that's going to be conducting a lot of heat from the sun and attracting sun. So I would say let the game bags do what they are scientifically built to do, which is allow your meat to breathe.
All right. There was my public spanking. I will work on my habits. You're always such a breath of fresh air, except for when I get in trouble, Sierra.
Oh, well, okay. Like I'm also, it's like, these are the best things to do, but you get in the field and you just do what needs to be done. By no means am I like, oh gosh, I just got into the hunting world. So this is all me coming from like in a perfect scenario.
Totally.
This is the scientific, correct answer. But in the field, you've got to do what you need to do to get your meat out.
Yep, absolutely. And it's, there's some interpretation, some things, are just cut and dry, like how long a meat can sit there, might be open to some interpretation. But I think that you just got to kind of do what you got to do. But it is a good reminder that, those contractor bags, they're not going to breathe. Like we know that, right? So if we're going to utilize them, then we just have to be really cautious of the timeline and the temperature and all of those different elements to make it safe in the end, for sure. We're really excited because Sierra's joining us at the Women's Wilderness Summit in Lewistown, Montana this coming August. And in addition to that piece that we have going on, which is going to be really awesome, lots of hands-on learning, we're doing some hands-on learning, so to speak, through our masterclass series this season of the podcast. So walk us through a little bit of what people can expect if they take the masterclass from you, Sierra.
Yes. So the whole reason that I built Butcher Solutions is because it's really hard to learn butchery through the internet or by reading a book or watching a YouTube video because it's such a hands-on trade. And so the concept behind the masterclass is let's actually get people in one place and talk through just, I guess, visually all those butchery pieces that just can't be learned by even just listening to a podcast. There's plenty of information to be learned, but there's so much that you want to be able to ask people your questions in person and you want to be able to see. And so even a lot of times, yes, if you've learned your butchery techniques by watching YouTube videos, that's great. And there's so many good resources out there. But how many times do you pause that video and you're rewinding and your fingers are covered in meat and you're kind of like trying to zoom in and be like, oh my gosh, wait, what did they do right there? And so the value of joining us for the masterclass, we will be walking through individual cuts of meat. I've got a carcass dummy that I'll have pulled up, showing you where these cuts or meats are coming from, what they're actually called, what they can be used for. And so kind of showing you preemptively where these cuts are at. We'll go through some knife sharpening techniques, but really like bring any questions that you have that relate to the hands-on butchery that you simply can't get by just listening. That is more of a visual, help me learn how to butcher something. And so we'll be walking through a lot of like hands-on meats things. And then with the summit, then in a couple of months, that's then another opportunity to get really hands-on with an actual carcass, actually cut some meat, and then further ingrain. Again, you can't learn butchery by just watching. You have to do it. And so by joining virtually here in a couple of weeks or in person in a couple of months, there's so many good things that we can say by just getting hands-on with an instructor and, just learning by doing is the best way.
Well, and I'm stoked because I feel like we spend so much time, especially our newer hunters, we're spending so much time trying to figure out all the gear and how to get out there and how to be successful and like how to find the animals. And so then, we spend all of that to then get them on the ground to go, okay, but now what? And so if we can get ladies to come in here and feel really confident about, okay, now I got it on the ground and this is exactly how I'm going to process it. And this is how I'm going to package it and safely put it in my freezer for my family for the next year. Like that's the cherry on top. That's the win right there.
Oh man. And how embarrassing to have like all of your rifles packed, your camping gear, your food's packed. And like, you're walking out the door and be like, is my knife sharp? I don't know. And like, that's the process that I've recently just went through. We were leaving for a bear hunt. The last thing I did was like whip out my sharpening stones. Like, oh my gosh, my knife's not sharp. It's missing the tip. And so I'm just like, man, I'm a butcher. And the knife I'm planning on like field dressing this bear is not up to snuff. And so like being able to like quickly sharpen a knife is important.
So much good information. We always love having you on. Let our listeners know, Sierra, where they can reach out and find you online.
Yes. So on Instagram, Butcher Solutions LLC is the best place to find me. The website, Butcher Solutions, also has my email, my phone number. So feel free, reach out if you have questions. But hopefully we'll see you online and in person here very soon.
And we didn't mention in this episode, but you also do in-person trainings. Talk just a little bit about how somebody could utilize those services if they do have something on the ground and have you in their area.
Absolutely. Yeah. Several folks are, hey, I've got, several members of my family. We would love to have you come out, do a training for myself, my husband, our sons, our daughters, neighbors, whoever it is. So if you've got either yourself or several folks that want to learn this process of butchery so then you can confidently do it yourself, give me a heads up a couple days, weeks before you have a hunt scheduled. And then hopefully then I can block off some time, and hopefully then you are successful. You'll have a critter down, and then I can come to you, and then we can do some kind of a hands-on workshop of actually butchering your animal, putting your cuts in the freezer, helping you walk through that process of everything from field dressing up through the actual fabrication of the meat cuts. And I can walk through everything there with you, and you can remember it for your next successful hunts.
What a great resource to have. Thank you so much, Sierra. We always appreciate having you come on. Don't miss checking her out. Butcher Solutions LLC.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. The Soul Summit podcast is brought to you by Maven Optics, Baku e-bikes, Hoyt Archery, Onyx Maps, and Sawyer Products. For more information on these companies or to access the Soul Summit podcast discount codes, be sure to check out our show notes.